Loh. Lah kok raine dadi kok ngene? Astagfirullahaladzim. Mbak Novi ya.
Iya, Bu.
Kami mengungsi hari ini. Bu Hani, selamat pagi. Demi marwahnya Bu Hani, marwahnya FKM, marwahnya semua. Hari ini kami mengungsi. Saya sudah lapor ke Bu Diana, BCU, biar disampaikan ke Prof. Denny. Saya berada di hotel nih. Sambungan internet.
Hello, Dr. Bernard. Good evening.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, ladies and
Waalaikumsalam
gentlemen.
warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much for being here. My name is Novia Handayani, and I will be your host today. It is such an honor to welcome you here in this event. Let me begin by giving you a warm welcome to the Visiting Professor program themed Ergonomic Lecture and Research Topics. In this lovely moment, I would like to say welcome to our today's speaker, Professor Thomas E. Bernard, PhD, or Dr. Bernard. Good morning, Professor. He is a professor from College of Public Health, University of South Florida. Our today's moderator, Hanifa M, PhD, from Faculty of Public Health, Diponegoro University. Selamat pagi, Bu Hanifa. Selamat pagi. The Honorable Dean of Faculty of Public Health, Diponegoro University, Dr. Budiono, SKM, MKes.
Selamat pagi, good morning,
Selamat pagi, good morning, Bapak. Also to all of our respected guests and participants. First of all, let us say thank you to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, who has been giving us mercy, guidance, happiness, and healthy, so we can attend and participate in this event without any obstacles until now. Praise and salutation upon our Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the last messenger, the best figure of this universe. In this special morning, we have several agendas, so please allow me to read several sequences of our agendas. The first is speech from the head of Master of Health Promotion, Dr. Yuliani Setianingsih, SKM MKes. The second is speech from the Dean of Faculty of Public Health, Dr. Budiono, SKM MKes. The third is lectures and discussion with Professor Thomas E. Bernard, PhD, or Dr. Bernard. Today's event is followed by participants from all around Indonesia, mostly from Faculty of Public Health, with total 200 participants. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all begin this event by reciting Basmalah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
Our dearest participants, let us get into the first session. Please welcome to the Honorable Head of Master of Health Promotion, Dr. Yuliani Setianingsih, SKM MKes. The screen is yours.
Oke. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi. Saya menggunakan bahasa Indonesia. Assalamualaikum, good morning everyone. Di pagi ini kami panjatkan puji syukur kehadirat Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. Acara ini dapat terselenggara dengan baik. Kegiatan ini adalah kegiatan bagian dari kegiatan WCU dari Universitas, yaitu tentang visiting profesor dengan topik materi tentang K3. Acara akan berlangsung selama 2 hari, hari ini dan besok. Hari ini pada pukul 7 dan besok juga hal yang sama pada pukul 7 dengan topik hari ini ergonomi dan besok tentang heat stress. Terima kasih kepada Bapak Dekan FKM Undip, Bapak Budiono, yang sudah berkenan untuk membuka acara sekaligus memberikan izin pada kami untuk menyelenggarakan acara ini, juga kepada Universitas Diponegoro, dan kepada moderator kita yang cantik, Bu Hanifa M. Denny. Terima kasih, sehat selalu Bu, yang mendukung acara di kegiatan Magister Promosi Kesehatan. Juga terima kasih kepada seluruh partisipan yang sudah bersedia hadir. Kami mohon untuk tetap ada pada pagi hari ini, nanti kurang lebih selama 2-3 jam, dan untuk kegiatan besok pagi. Harapan kami acara ini bermanfaat untuk semuanya, kemudian memberikan bekal ilmu yang baik, sehingga ini adalah ilmu yang menurut saya luar biasa, jadi mari bersama-sama kita belajar bersama. Untuk tim yang sudah susah payah untuk menyelenggarakan acara ini, juga terima kasih juga kepada Bu Novia selaku MC pada pagi hari ini yang sudah mau bergabung. Thank you for share knowledge, being willing to speaker and willing to share knowledge, Prof. Binat. Good morning. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi.
Waalaikumsalam
warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome, Dr. Yuliani. Moving to the second session, please welcome to the Honorable Dean of Faculty of Public Health, Diponegoro University, and please be willing to open this event. To Dr. Budiono, SKM MKes, the screen is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Waalaikumsalam.
Dear Vice Dean for the Academic and Student Affairs, Dr. Nurjazuli SKM MKes, Vice Dean for Resources, Dr. Apoina Kartini MKes, Head of Study Program of the Master of Health Promotion, Faculty of Public Health, Diponegoro University, the Moderator, Mrs. Hanifa M, PhD, the lecturers, students, and also the participants. I respect the speaker, Prof. Thomas R. Bernard, PhD, from the College of Public Health, University of South Florida, United States. I know that your discipline is in occupational safety and health, and with the specialization is industrial hygiene. And thank you for all participants for joining this virtual meeting. And this event initiated by Mrs. Hanifa M, PhD, and the team, especially from the Magister of Health Promotion. Of course, I respect to the IT team of the visiting professor program. First of all, let us say praise to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, who gives thousands of efforts to us until this day. This program involves students of the Magister of Health Promotion, Faculty of Public Health, Diponegoro University, also students from the undergraduate program, and maybe the foreign participants and other participants from Indonesia. Diponegoro University has the program that called Visiting Professor for the world-class university achievement. This program conducted routinely and will continue to the next year and next year. I think it's a good moment for sharing knowledge, experiences, maybe networking and collaboration between us. And this session aims to enrich students, lecturers, participants, and knowledge and experiences in the field of ergonomic and health stress, industrial ergonomic, included occupational health and safety administration, physical agent and the control, and also the evaluation of control of head stress, for example, and of course the ergonomic. I think with the implementing of ergonomic solution can be makes employees more comfortable, and it's clear that will increase the productivity. Ergonomic is important because when you are doing a job or work, or your body is stressed by an upward position, I mean, extreme temperature or repeated movement, your musculoskeletal system is affected. In this discussion or in this meeting, I'm sure that we are want to know about the ergonomics and head stress, especially in the modern country. What the factor related the ergonomic or head stress, and what the disorder or dysfunction related to ergonomic or head stress, for example, body muscles, I mean, joints, tendons, ligament, or nerves. And then what the impact on productivity? For example, the cost or money will spend for this effect, and of course, how to prevent this problem. I think the participant and moderator will facilitate this discussion. I think it's very interesting for us to get some knowledge and also experiences that shared by Professor Bernard from the University of South Florida, United States. Hopefully, Prof. Bernard, our colleagues, lecturer, student, and the participants enjoying this meeting on this lecture. Thank you very much for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. With your permission, I say Bismillahirrahmanirrahim to open this meeting. Terima kasih. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Dr. Budiono, for the speech and to open this event as well. Before we move to the next session, I would like to remind our respected guests and participants to fill in the register form. We will share the link on the chat room. Sebelum kita masuk ke sesi selanjutnya, saya ingin mengingatkan kepada seluruh peserta untuk dapat mengisi form registrasi yang akan kami share, akan kami bagikan pada chat room. To any of you who have questions for our speaker, please kindly write down your questions on the Q&A section, or please kindly raise your hand and wait to be called by our moderator to ask directly. Kepada Anda semua yang ingin bertanya atau memiliki pertanyaan, dipersilakan untuk dapat menuliskan pertanyaan Anda pada kolom Q&A, atau Anda juga dapat raise your hand dengan cara mengklik tombol raise hand, sehingga Anda bisa bertanya langsung kepada pembicara setelah Anda dipersilakan oleh moderator. Last but not least, please kindly turn off your microphone during this event, except you are allowed to turn it on by our moderator or our speaker. Terakhir, tetapi tidak kalah penting, mohon untuk mematikan mikrofon Anda selama event ini berlangsung, atau bila Anda sudah dipersilahkan untuk menyalakan mikrofon Anda oleh moderator atau oleh pembicarakan. Now we are going to move to the most important session for today's event, the lectures and discussion from Professor Thomas E. Bernard, PhD, or Dr. Bernard, moderated by Hanifa M, Denny, PhD, or Dr. Denny. It is now my pleasure to introduce our today's moderator. Hanifa M is an associate professor in Diponegoro University, Faculty of Public Health. Dr. Denny studies in Indonesia, the Philippines, Sweden, Germany, and USA were focused in public health, majoring in environmental and occupational health. She was the former president of the Indonesian Public Health Union, or Persakni, in 2008 to 2017. She was also the former dean of Faculty of Public Health, Diponegoro University, in 2015 to 2019, and also an independent consultant in occupational health and safety for WHO, ILO, Ministry of Health of Indonesia, and GTZ, as well as the member of the National Council of Occupational Safety and Health, Republic of Indonesia. Now, to the beautiful and cheerful Dr. Denny, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Mbak Novia, our junior talented lecturer at Diponegoro University. I am happy to hear your voice. Good morning, everyone, and special good evening for Dr. Bernard. Dr. Bernard was formerly my students at VISE or advisor during my PhD program and also during my dissertation writing. So it is an honor for me and for all of us to be with him, considering his very rich experiences and a long-term experiences in occupational safety and health. So I would like to introduce Dr. Bernard to you. So Dr. Bernard has a 784 citation with 593 documents and Scopus Age Index of 17, a very, very high age index. And Dr. Bernard is a professor in the University of South Florida College of Public Health, and he has 45 years of practice, teaching, and research in occupational health with special interest in heat stress and ergonomic. So, Dr. Bernard is the director of the Sunshine Education and Research Center, which is a training grant and participated on professional committee to promote workers' health. I was the recipient of one of the grant for presenting my study in Istanbul in 2012. So in 2011, thank you, Dr. Bernard, for extending a lot of generosity during my study. So Dr. Bernard adalah profesor dari University of South Florida College of Public Health, dan beliau sudah berpengalaman selama 45 tahun sebagai dosen yang melaksanakan perkuliahan dan juga penelitian bidang kesehatan kerja, dan dengan minat khusus yaitu stres atau tekanan panas dan ergonomi. Dr. Bernard ini adalah Direktur Sunshine Education and Research Center yang mengelola dana-dana penelitian dan kegiatan pelatihan serta berpartisipasi dalam komite profesional untuk meningkatkan kesehatan kerja. Beliau mempunyai 784 citation dan 593 dokumen, kemudian Scopus H-index-nya 17. Sangat berpengalaman sekali, dan beliau sudah mulai menjadi dosen ketika saya baru lahir. Untuk itu, pengalaman yang banyak ini kita serap dan jangan ragu untuk bertanya. Bertanyalah dalam bahasa Indonesia, tidak harus berbahasa Inggris, tetapi berbahasa Inggris juga sangat bagus sekali. Silakan. So, Dr. Bernard, the floor is yours. Time is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all for the very warm welcome. And I do appreciate it. I'm sorry that I can't visit in person. We can all hope that day will come sooner than later. So once again, I appreciate this opportunity. And if there's anything that I can do to answer questions immediately, or if there's a time later to follow up, I would be happy to do that. Right. And so what I'd like to do is share my screen for the PowerPoint presentation. I There is a copy available. Uh, Dr. Denny, is that posted now? And then I will refer to one other document that's a kind of checklist for ergonomics during this presentation, and both of those should be available to you. Can you confirm that you see the presentation? One moment, I think I've got them reversed. Let me come back and see if I can get these on the right screen.
Okay.
Okay, we'll see if this works.
I have forwarded your email to the head of the study program, Dr. Setyaningsih, and also the secretary of the study program,
Okay.
Mr. Priyadi Nugraha Prabhamoti.
All right. So let me see if we're going to now share the right screen.
Yes.
Okay.
Now it's visible.
All right. Is it visible? Do we have the right
Yes,
screen?
exactly. Clear.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Thank you. With 6 months experience, I'm still trying to learn the technology. So again, thank you for your patience. I do want to thank my employer, the University of South Florida. I would like to thank you all, the university, and to the Faculty of Public Health. This is a great honor. I've had a great deal of support from the CDC and especially the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health here in the United States. In the area of ergonomics, I've done a good bit of work with the Union and Ford Motor Company as a joint effort. And then I've also done work for Ford Motor Company independent of the unions. And so I want to recognize the substantial support that I've had from them over the years. And of course, I need to tell people that anything I say is only represents me and not the opinion of anybody else in the So ergonomics. I use a very simple definition of ergonomics. It's fitting the job to the person. And that's a very important distinction. For occupationally, for thousands of years, we have tried to find the right person to do the job that was designed. So philosophically, this is a complete reversal of the thought process. And then the goal is to enhance performance. So it was mentioned earlier about the importance of productivity. And then also, because we were in public health, it's important to note that if we fit the job correctly to the person, we also enhance well-being, which is truly the purpose of public health. So when we talk about goals for fitting people to the job, the ideal is that it's almost everybody. More practically speaking, we try to get 95% of the people, and sometimes we may fall a little bit short of that goal. But whenever we miss somebody in that design process, we like to be able to come back and say, okay, but let's try to create then a special accommodation for those that we can't include, so that in fact, we can meet the desired goal of everybody. The benefits to the employer, and forgive me because my perspective is the United States, and I think my work has mainly been focused on large employers. With ergonomics, especially, is that we've reached the large employers. It's trying to now find the small employers in the informal economy, and I think there we share that goal and that challenge. It benefits through improvement in safety and health as well as well-being. It does improve productivity and, importantly, job satisfaction. And I'm going to highlight job satisfaction because in just about every epidemiological study that's looked at musculoskeletal disorders, is that one of the best predictors of whether somebody's going to report a musculoskeletal disorder has to do with how satisfied they are with their job. And this is a very robust finding. We get it in study after study. So the importance of job satisfaction is there. I am going to have an emphasis on musculoskeletal disorders because that's the area in which I really work. It tends to be very expensive for us. It represents 50% of worker compensation costs, often is found in the higher range of costs against the other kinds of injuries. We have our health and safety enforcement branch in the government, OSHA. It does cite, and there is yet just continued frustration with the problem. And really it's because there is no simple answer. The fact that we talk about musculoskeletal disorders yet today is really not a surprise, and we've known about them for at least 300 years. And you can probably go back to the Romans with reports of musculoskeletal disorders in the performance of work. I will not spend I will spend some time talking about ergonomics in terms of being a program or a process. So we really want this to fit into a continuous improvement process. It's not come in, do something and leave and everything is fine in that regard. So some of the first things I'm going to talk about are management programs. They need to fit within an occupational safety and health management system, and there are many proposals both internationally through the ISO and the ILO, as well as through other professional consensus organizations. A couple of key elements central to ergonomics is a written program. We do know that when a program is written, that the performance is better. It needs an appropriate work site analysis. We're going to be talking about that several times this morning. Hazard prevention and control. And then a little bit, I'm just going to touch briefly on medical management, training, and education. And then, of course, emphasizing the continuous improvement process. In safety, we emphasize the written program in companies because we need to communicate from a top-down approach that this is clearly valued by the employer. It outlines goals and plans. This is so that we can have accountability for progress. It is communicated throughout the workplace, And again, dates are established for when milestones need to be reached. And I have seen these, and the most effective programs are ones with very well organized routine meetings with a review of the jobs and what's been done to improve them, and feedback on the results. For the worksite analysis, it's to recognize and evaluate jobs. Generally, and again, in the perspective of a large company, you can identify trends within groups of people who do similar work. Within a governmental context, you can collect data on similar industries and activities. And again, you'll find trends in terms of any illness or injury, including musculoskeletal disorders, and those become insightful for change. It's important to have a scheme for analysis because it identifies both jobs that are in need of change, but also can identify light duty jobs so people can be rotated into an appropriate light duty job. The analysis of hazardous jobs is that step, as well as the periodic review that I've just mentioned already. Recognition is also works along several dimensions, and I will spend time with you this morning with job risk factors, both in terms of the kind of generic broad descriptions of job risk factors and in ways that we try to tease these out through analysis. We won't spend much time on medical surveillance, but it's helpful to know personal risk factors. Some people are more susceptible to others. Look for the early signs and symptoms. And again, where we have records, there's that opportunity to examine those records to see if we have a trend. And then the other is that, do we close the loop? Are we in fact in a continuous improvement process? Okay, so the job risk factors, and I'll mention this several times this morning. If nothing else, if you remember that it's force, posture, and frequency. Those are the common elements of job risk through any of the joint and muscle systems. Duration and mechanical stress are other job risk factors. In terms of hazard prevention and control, I will speak a little bit today, and I'll come back to that theme tomorrow with heat stress, but general controls are the kinds of things that we just ought to have implemented. Those would be training, hygiene practices, which are things that an individual can do to protect themselves, and then surveillance. Job-specific controls follow the usual hierarchy with some attention to work practices, and work practices are important in musculoskeletal disorders, and appreciation for new employee conditioning and preventive maintenance. The engineering controls, administrative controls, and then I put personal protection because it is part of the hierarchy, but there really are no methods of personal protection, personal protective equipment that fits for ergonomics. And so really we must rely on the work practices, the engineering controls, and administrative controls. In terms of the comment on controls, again, it's a continuous improvement process that always involves a team effort with the engineers, the production supervisors and management, as well as the employees. Good design practice really dictates you look at more than one possible solution and really test and evaluate candidate solutions, revise and reevaluate, and then implement those solutions. And again, downstream that continuous improvement process, but evaluate those changes. Medical management is the injury and illness record keeping. Remember, I mentioned early recognition of symptoms so employees can report them. And the same thing, if we have early reporting of symptoms, we can have early treatment and a conservative treatment with a reasonable return to work. The training and education is for all the kinds of controls. It should include supervisors as well. And then there are going to be others such as the managers, engineers, and maintenance personnel should be involved in these. Okay, so with that, I've kind of given an overview of a program. What I want to do now is step back from that picture for a moment and ask about job assessment at a high level or a more global view. And what is it about job assessment we might expect? And one of the things that I found in ergonomics over, as Dr. Denny pointed out, it's been now a long career of 45 years, is that every time we see a problem, we kind of say, oh, of course, and we should have known that. That's common sense. And then as a philosopher observed, there's nothing more uncommon than common sense. And that's the reason why we need to bring our discipline of public health into occupational health and then specifically into ergonomics. And I like to frame this as is that ergonomics is there to help you ask the right questions and then seek the right answers to those questions. So ergonomics is helping to frame the question. This morning, I'd like to just kind of simplify a worldview of ergonomics and say that it's really the intersection of anthropometry and physiology, how the body functions physically, with that controlling overlay of psychology. And in terms of the early part of the discussion, I'm going to do psychology first and then quickly leave that topic. We'll pass through ergonomics and then really emphasize a little bit more of the physiology. So the psychological aspects can be how it is we make decisions and take action on those decisions. That's cognitive and psychomotor performance. Also important are organizational and personal factors. So it's how the organization sets a climate, and they set a climate for safety and well-being as well as production. So the organization exerts considerable influence. And then regardless of what the organization presents for an environment, we bring our own personal worldview to that. And so these form than a psychosocial environment. And as I mentioned before, we certainly found it in our Ford studies and other investigators have found it, but the psychosocial environment within a plant is very, very predictive of musculoskeletal disorders. It's also predictive of health and safety performance. The manifestations of the psychological aspects are mistakes, accidents, and injuries. That's mainly the cognitive and psychomotor, with the organizational factors overlaying those. And then also the illness that are related to stress caused in the workplace. So a simple model to think about the accidents is that there's a terminal event that's driven by critical actions. These are errors. This is where we're going to say it's unsafe behaviors. And then the natural response is then blame the person that caused the accident. In reality, that's just about never the case. There's nobody who just wants to cause an accident. There's going to be factors that are inherent in the work that are going to help facilitate that accident. that unsafe behavior. And those contextual factors, in fact, could have been existing for years, which is the predisposing factors. Shifting now quickly, as you saw, I'm leaving psychology, and I want to mention anthropometry over the next few slides. And really, remember I said that the goal of ergonomics is to fit the job to the person. And anthropometry was really one of the first steps that actually formalized that concept, fitting a person into a workstation. And basically, it's fitting a physical person. So it's the dimensions. I have here a picture of a lathe, and then what a human looks like that would be required to operate the lathe. And then if we really reverse the idea of trying to fit a person to the designing that person to fit the job, you could see that anthropometrically, that's a much different kind of person. It's the reason why we're not going to change people that much. So it helps to illustrate the value of making sure we do the design right. Classically, it is equipment design, as I mentioned, with the goals that everybody can do it and not be limited. And I'm not going to dwell on this example, but turret gunners during the Second World War had height and weight requirements. They then had trouble recruiting enough into this position, so they relaxed the height and weight requirements, and then discovered that already 30 to 40% of the people had trouble. So it was really a matter that you had to go back and redesign the equipment. When we think about the human population, we have differences. The first is sex. Men and women are of different sizes, both in average and in distribution. Age, it's sad for me to report, but I'm getting shorter and I'm getting heavier, and I'm just following the population. There, of course, are differences among race and ethnicities. There's even differences among occupations, and some of that has to do with self-selection. And then as we influence nutrition and well-being, there will be changes in the anthropometrics. And then all the variability within a group, so that we do have measures of central tendency and distribution. And what we really concentrate on in anthropometrics are the distributions. We're not terribly concerned about the central tendency because we don't design to the average person. And in fact, the average person doesn't exist. If we have very broad definitions of what an average might be, what happens is that over a few dimensions, we find out nobody is average across 4 or more dimensions. So the average person doesn't exist. What we really are doing is trying to look for what are clearances. We want a door that's tall enough that most people can go through. We want to have, so that's the tallest person. We want to be able to reach things in our workstation. That really dictates the maximum distance based on the shortest person. And then, of course, there are going to be times where we're going to have to accommodate a range of people. So I want to leave with you that thought that anthropometrics is important. And there's a great deal of data available, and I didn't look in the ISO document, but I suspect that there are data available for the Indonesian population. Dr. Denny, if it's of any value to anybody, please get back to me and I'll find that data. Okay, so for design steps, again, we establish functional requirements. We use the anthropometry to make our early choices, and then we test those designs and then redesign as necessary. So you're going to see that I overlay or underlay continuous improvement processes within the whole thing. Now, the anthropometry is a nice way to step into the fact that we also need to be worried about biomechanics. And that really helps us then to ask questions about, am I strong enough to do this job? And if I am strong enough, am I going to hurt myself trying to do it? And unfortunately, almost all of us are strong enough to hurt ourselves. What plays a role here is muscle strength. So different muscle groups have different strengths. My legs are stronger than my arms, which are stronger than my fingers. So it depends upon the muscle groups. And then interestingly enough, it also depends upon the posture. And the best way I can illustrate that is if you make a fist and squeeze tight, you'll get a sense of how much force you can exert. Then if you bend your wrist about 90 degrees and try to squeeze again, you'll notice that you can't squeeze as tightly. So there's an optimal muscle length. As you stretch the muscles in the forearm, you weaken them. And that's true of the elbow as you extend the arm or flex it. It's true of the legs. It's true of every muscle group. And then the biomechanics says, okay, if I'm strong enough, then am I going to exert enough internal forces that actually are going to damage joints, tendons, or muscles? And just quickly, the body has many third-class lever systems. So the one example is the elbow. So the elbow is the point of rotation. You have the bicep inserting very close to the elbow and the load is out here. What that tells us is that the force that has to be generated by the muscle is going to be much greater than the force that's being held. In fact, it's about 11 to 1. And with just a little bit more complicated system, which is the back, we have still basically the same relationship, so that we're going to be exerting a great deal of force with our erector spinae muscles in order to be able to lift than the load that we're lifting. And then these lead to problems. So third-class lever systems are designed to enhance movement. So I can get a great deal of movement in space with a very small change in muscle length. So that's the advantage of a third-class lever system. But it has that inherent mechanical disadvantage that it causes forces that are 10 times or more greater in the muscles that have to counteract those external forces. So what's important is understanding the load, how much what's the effort that I'm going to have to exert, how far away from that rotating point, the fulcrum, and for the low back, you know, for a lift, the low back is that point. And then we also worry about body weight, because not only are we moving the load, but we have to move the weight of our body as well. So biomechanics takes into consideration the complexity of those levers and muscles and the interactions. And I'm going to show you later a very simple biomechanical model, but there's some very sophisticated ones. Then the physiology helps us to understand, can I do this long enough? So are we going to get tired? And if I can do it long enough, do I have enough time to recover before I go and do it again? And those are going to center around basically fatigue. Am I going to fatigue local muscle groups, which is static work, or am I going to exhaust overstress the cardiovascular system, which is the dynamic work based on aerobic capacity? I just want to point out that in terms of the science, we have a pretty good idea about the the amount of static effort or the cycles of static effort and relaxation and work demands, that we understand this part pretty well. So some of the work I've done with Ford, we were on very short cycle tasks, so we were up in this area, but others have investigated this. So this curve of kind of exhaustion, depending upon how long in a cycle of work is the exertion, that's the duty cycle, and then how much is the maximum effort. And then notice that the recovery time for any given effort, that recovery multiplier goes up very, very quickly with our willingness to make a single exertion. In dynamic work, it's very similar. We know how long somebody can work at a different rate of their maximum aerobic capacity, and then given their work time and capacity for the fraction of the demands of the work, how much recovery time. So I just wanted to give you a sense that the biomechanics is pretty well understood, and the physiology of static and dynamic work are fairly well understood. But the area that continues to receive attention is the cumulative trauma disorder. So over days, months, and years, am I doing this often enough and long enough to cause cumulative damage? And that is the crux of musculoskeletal disorders. Right. The way I kind of look at musculoskeletal disorders, especially as I go up and look at a job, is I have a posture that the work is being done in, and that posture is multiple postures. So it's where my hand and wrist are, it's what my elbow, where my shoulder is, how much I'm bending into the job. So it's all the body joints being in play on the job. I ask about the force and weight around those joints. And then I assess in my mind, what's the biomechanical risk, right? So that's the biomechanics question. And then I add the duration. So we have our risk factors: posture, force, and duration repetition. So that begins to give us an idea of what's the risk for a musculoskeletal disorder. And then it's just the combinations. If I have low biomechanical risk, I don't do it very much. I've got low risk overall. On the other hand, I might have low biomechanical risk, but I do it with a high rate of repetition for long periods of time. That still can be problematic. And of course, high biomechanical risk done often is looking for a problem. I'll mention this part is most clearly evident for low back pain and injury. And it really is, in the end, this biomechanical risk in combination with repetition really starts to dictate the risk overall. With musculoskeletal disorders, we still are working in this realm of expert judgment. We have some quantitative analysis methods, and I'm going to show you a few of them that have been proven well in the literature. But I will also try to tell you that the abilities of these tools are still weak. The underlying assumption we work with is if we start to reduce these risk factors, that we will make an improvement. The problem we have is that it's difficult to exactly describe the risk reduction or the amount of improvement. Okay, so when we look at the assessment principles, and again, this is going to be a bit of a high level and for the fact that English is a second language, I apologize a little bit, but I love the expression of a concatenation of ephemeralities. What these really are a series of fleeting events. And so our work life, as well as some play, is we have very, very small insults to the body. And it's as we string these insults together is what gives us the cumulative effect. So it's very difficult with musculoskeletal disorders to point to one thing. All right. Sorry. So the job risk factors I've mentioned before, and I'm going to mention them again here, especially force, posture, and frequency, and then duration and mechanical stress. And when we try to evaluate jobs, we need to be considering these job risk factors. So what does an assessment tool do? It's like providing grades to our students. It provides a score. It helps us to classify the job. If it's an ergonomics tool, it helps us to classify a student if it happens to be an exam score. And we tend to think about the scores in ergonomics as being at least green and red. And we're going to talk a bit about what yellow really means. So green is good and that job is fine. Red is bad and we really need something to change it. Okay, so deciding good and bad, that's what we do with our ruler. And in public health, we'll tend to drive our decision threshold down because we want to get all of the bad jobs. And then what we sometimes do is not sometimes, but in ergonomics often is we also identify a lot of good jobs that really are not. And it's not a fine line. Nor is it very precise. They're modestly reliable, but if it says 5.2, it's not, it can be 4.5, it can be 6. There is some variability in our precision. And then in the end, we are going to be making judgments. So working especially with Ford for a while, we looked long and hard at this idea of setting a low threshold for green, high threshold for red jobs, and then yellow jobs in the middle. And what yellow was for us was really uncertain. So yellow isn't that it's not quite bad, not quite good. Yellow means we just don't know where it is. Now, Ford moves away from the typical public health model, and they say what we really want to know is what's red. So working with Ford and the union, we've gone for the high threshold. So we can tell you a job is going to be bad. And really what we do is then we can tell you if it's not bad, and we're good at not bad. We're really good at not bad. So that means they don't have to expend any more resources looking at that job any further, or do it. They can set it away with confidence. And then what they do is they go back on the jobs that really need more work on them, and then they'll analyze those jobs. And I'm sorry, but the threshold gets set down here. So we get all the green jobs with them, and then they're willing to go back, capture some good jobs, but know that they've got all the bad ones. Okay. Apparently I don't want to get, so the WSHA checklist, and this is, I didn't provide you with just gobs of handouts, many handouts. This is one that I think is useful for doing a screening check on a job. I have modified it more in terms of format than content than the state of Washington Department of Labor and Industries uses. And the reason why I included it is because, one, I think it does a good job, and especially good for the lower back, a little less good for hands and the other body regions, neck and shoulder and hands and wrist. But it also is easy to use by anybody. You don't have to be highly trained, and it at least gives you an idea if there might be a problem. Just quickly is that there's on the same checklist, you can now distinguish between a caution zone or a hazard zone. And again, so these are the changes I made to the one published by the state of Washington. And then I reorganized the risk factors a little bit by body regions. But for low back, these are incredibly good. If you have bent back for 2 or 4 hours, caution or danger, hazard, or 45 minutes for an hour. And I noticed, I think what was probably a rice field is they're harvesting rice. The brief ones I've seen is that there's a lot of sustained bending. So we would expect, for instance, that we would see back problems, as well as, I don't know what a bunch of rice weighs. When we get to heat stress, we'll talk about how productivity is also affected by the heat. But if very limited lifts of 75 pounds are okay, and frequent lifts of 55 can be a little bit problematic, and then distant lifts of 10 or 20 pounds. So it, again, just starts to set up whether the risk factors, and notice posture, weight, and time and frequency are there. So it has the job risk factors in a very simple way. For hands and wrists, it has posture in terms of grip types. It asks about repetitiveness. It has a special case for intensive keying, like data entry. And then this is the first example where we talk about mechanical stress, but remember, mechanical stress is very important. And this is where you use your hand as a hammer. And then hand-arm vibration is vibrating tools, and whether there's a light vibration, such as an orbital sander, or a very heavy vibration, such as a jackhammer. For neck and shoulder, one of the few that talks about neck postures, and again, tilted back forward at 30 and 45 degrees. We know from the automotive manufacturing that extending the neck also upwards is going to lead to neck and shoulder problems. Shoulders based on elevated elbow. So if you ever get the elbow, I'm losing it there. If the elbow ever gets up to shoulder height, there's a great increase for the rotator cuff, and then repetitive motion. For knee, squatting and kneeling, for instance, we did a study on osteoarthritis, and squatting and kneeling is a very, very strong predictor for an occupationally related osteoarthritis. And then also we found there, and others have found, that again, knee impacts. So anytime you use the knee is kind of a hammer to tighten things, that'll be problematic. All right, and then the decisions are it's organized by body area. And if you don't check off caution or hazard in any, then the risks are low. If you check off hazard, it really indicates in this checklist framework that you've got a problem that you probably ought to be paying attention to soon. the middle one, the caution is that if you've got time and resources to do it. All right. Now, with the little bit of time I have left, or yeah, I was trying to, I'm sorry, it took me a moment to look at my watch and get the timing right. With the time I have left, I want to go through some of the more detailed analysis methods. Dr. Henny, this might be a moment to ask if there are any questions before I get into the more detailed analysis. Pause for a moment, maybe.
Okay, maybe I could, hello, partisipan, sudah ada yang ingin bertanya? Dipersilahkan untuk bertanya. I'm trying to ask the participant if there is a question, Dr. Bernard.
Yes, I'm afraid I probably talked a little fast and covered a lot of things, but
it's a good idea to
and it won't get
stop for a
better.
moment and then open the question. Okay, silakan apabila ada yang bertanya. Okay, materinya nanti kita okay. There is a question whether the material could be shared to the audiences, and I would say yes, we can we will distribute the material for the participants. Adakah yang ingin bertanya? Dipersilakan. So, Dr. Munat, I would like to make a summarize of your previous presentation in Bahasa Indonesia. So maybe the participant will have some question. Is that okay?
Okay.
Okay. So, apa yang sudah dikemukakan Dr. Bernard adalah bahwa esensi dari ergonomi adalah mencocokkan manusia.
Mrs. Hanifa, Mrs.
Ya.
Hanifa, sorry, I just unmuted by organizer, so I can ask something to Professor Bernard.
Okay, please. Okay.
Yeah,
No
yeah.
problem.
Thank you very much for the lecture, Prof. Bernard. I want to know about the analyze for the especially ergonomic and industrial area. I think in Indonesia it's very different with the modern country like US, for example. Because in our country may lack of data for the analysis, the ergonomic. What your advice for this condition? Thank you very much.
Sure. So this is the and I tried to say it a little bit in the beginning because again, yes, my emphasis is on large companies. Because that's to apologize only a little bit. That's where I've done my work. But if I can convey, I think the job risk factors and I want to emphasize those job risk factors are force, posture, frequency, so that somebody begins to fix in their mind this, and then by example begin to show them analysis methods. Even if those analysis methods aren't used, you begin to see how force, posture, and frequency interplay, so that when you go to, as a health professional, go to a small employer or to the informal economy or provide information to them, you can provide it in a way that's easily communicated, and they'd be able to make use of it. We are going to struggle here in the US with exactly that question, less so for the informal economy, but for the small employer. how to convey these messages in simple ways. The state of Washington checklist that I did provide was actually designed for small employers. So somebody without a professional staff there. So I think a little bit with that our research in the U.S. is going toward small employers. I think with your experience with small employers and in the informal economy, that you'll be able to begin to see these principles and then begin to ask, how can we easily and simply convey them to those people we want to help? Does that help? In other words, and especially now this second half, as I begin to talk, I'm going to be getting into some more technical methods. I think that I would expect less that those technical methods would be used directly, but rather they help me to reinforce the idea it's force, posture, and frequency. And that little bit of a flow chart where force and posture tell you biomechanical risk, and then frequency begins to tell you how often that's done. That those should point then toward, is there something we can do to improve the postures? Is there something we can do to reduce the forces? Is there something we can do to help share that so that the frequency or the duration is shorter? And then those become simple questions to ask and answer. Maybe they don't have an easy answer, but they're an easy question to ask.
Thank you, Mr. Professor and
What do you think, Dr. Budiana?
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right.
Okay, all right, thank you very
much. Should we begin the second part?
Wani, izin bertanya bisa?
Okay, please, Dr. Setyaningsih, please.
Wani mungkin bisa ditanyakan bagaimana terkait program ergonomi di sektor informal. Seringkali kan kita tidak bisa menggabungkan beberapa teori. Nah, mungkin ada tips khusus untuk itu di tempat kerja yang sektor informal. Terima kasih.
Okay, Dr. Bernard, Dr. Setyaningsih was asking, what about facing the challenge for developing an ergonomic and informal sector that cannot combine or cannot fit with the theory?
I'm sorry, what was the very last?
What kind of tip?
Your voice cut out, Dr. Denny.
Okay.
The very last.
Bu Ani, saya mohon izin mau menghadiri wisuda mahasiswa baru PSDKU. Mohon maaf.
Dr. Budiana, would you like to
Professor Bernard, I'm sorry, I have to go out or leave to this meeting because I have to attend for welcoming the new student, especially for the student out of city of Semarang. Thank you very much for your lecture and see you tomorrow, insyaAllah. Terima kasih, Bu Ani. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Mohon maaf.
Waalaikumsalam.
Thank you very much for attending. Yeah. I appreciate the demands on a dean. So that's.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Should we begin again then?
Yeah. The question from Dr. Setyaningsih was how to face the difficulties in developing ergonomic program in informal sectors, considering that we cannot combine with many theories in the real application of informal sector workers.
Yeah. So, so I think, and again, an opportunity for research how to make this work. But I really see it as kind of two things. There are going to be some common activities that you're going to find in the informal sector. And um, and so I think having simple education material that focuses on some of those common activities, and then ways of reducing the stress for those and sharing that in the informal economy would be good, I think. And then the way you're going to learn about those common jobs is both your observations as well as what you might find from any government statistics you might have on that kind of an economy. But focusing on a sector with some common activities and common solutions that are low cost, I think, be an effective way of starting that.
Dr. Setyaningsih, did Dr. Bernard answer the question? Like, jadi dengan apa low cost solution, biaya yang murah, kemudian jangan lupa meminta bantuan dari pemerintah dan menggunakan bahasa yang sangat sederhana yang mudah dimengerti.
Yes,
Okay,
thank you for
thank
your
you.
question. Thank you for the
Thank you,
question. I think it's important for
thank
me
you, Prof. Bernard.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it is.
Yeah.
I admitted that it is very challenging to develop the economy and informal sector, and considering that 60% of our populations, workforce populations, work in informal sectors. So thank you, Dr. Setyaningsih. This is very good question. Okay, thank you, Dr. Bernard. Any question? Adakah yang ingin bertanya? Silahkan, apakah ingin bertanya tentang bagaimana prinsip biomekanik, kemudian psikologi, fisiologi, dan antropometri, serta postur kerja? Silahkan. Dr. Bernard, the audiences of this lecture is actually the undergraduate students and then graduate students as well as our alumni. So there is also, yeah,
Right.
some of them, and some of the audiences, they use the YouTube live streaming because of the limitation of the capacity to include in this Zoom session.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So I think we have just about 1 hour left.
Yes.
Yes. All right. I won't use the whole hour, but let me continue. And now remember, we're going to go from the higher level. We talked about programs, and then we talked about the general principles with the job risk factors, and a bit about how they interplay. So you're going to see these in the analysis methods I'm going to now discuss. So for the hand and wrist,
Mbak, YouTube jalurnya absensi Mbak Kaira.
Okay, so for the hand and wrist, these are general hand and wrist disorders. So it can include carpal tunnel, but it's trigger finger. It can just be various tendonitis of various tendons. So as a health outcome, turns out that there's one method that really is pretty reliable. So with recent epidemiology studies, I've I've started to take my focus from a variety of methods of assessing the hand and wrist to really just this one method. All right. Again, it's force, posture, and frequency are the job risk factors. So hand activity level is, which we will call HAL, is expressed on this 11-point scale that goes from 0 to 10. And it's simple in some regards to look at this. 0 is basically an idle hand. It's not doing anything. And that's probably the case for most of us that are listening today. At the other extreme is 10, which means that the hand is so totally involved in activities that you're having trouble keeping up, or the exertion is continuous. And so as we go through here, there's something to note about these. It really breaks out into two kinds of things. The top half, if you will, going through here talks about motion. So there's consistent, long pauses, steady motion, rapid, steady motion, difficulty keeping up. So it's the frequency piece. And the bottom part are slow motions, frequent, brief, pardon me. It doesn't like it when I use the pointer, but it's continuous exertion. So it's the opposite of high frequency, but it's that sustained kind of grip or sustained activity, right? And so this scale is really looking at both of those possibilities. So it's how busy are the hands? And then the force is looked at from a little bit different point of view. So it's called a normalized peak force. So in that job, we're going to look for something that resembles the 90th percentile force. So we don't want to have the absolute worst case, but something that's reasonably typically high. And then we look for the strength of the weaker person. And usually we take the 25th percentile strength. What's important about normalized peak force is it's inclusive of the posture. So remember I talked about when looking at the hand that we can have a grasp, we can have a pinch, we can have that grasp or a pinch in a number of postures. And when we talk about how much force the kind of weaker person can exert, we want that in that posture. Then the normalized peak force is that observed force divided by the reference value and then multiplied by 10. So we're going to get a number again that goes between 0 and 10. And conceivably, it could get above 10. It's not good, but it can be there. All right. And so the normalized peak force was intended to be measured. This, again, is almost never done in practice because it requires some expertise and some equipment, but you can begin to ask people about the how much effort they think they're giving. And they can report it on this scale. So 0 is again, no exertion at all. And if they would report a 10, that means that it's almost a maximal exertion. You can't exert any more force than that. And many times you're going to get reports that are down in this area. That's going to be typical of almost all work. And pardon me, the And then using this value it becomes the normalized peak force. We then can look at the relationship between the normalized peak force and the hand activity and begin to talk about thresholds. So this says that if the hands are really pretty busy, then we can exert nothing more than a very light force, very weak. So almost no exertion at all. And if we're going to have very high exertions, up near the 50% of the capacity, then these have to occur very infrequently, very slowly. This black line is the threshold limit value. So I haven't marked it on this graph very well, but when you're in this area, we're pretty sure that you're going to see injuries. The literature just says that that's the case. We also know that if we're below the dashed line, that you're not likely to see very much. This becomes that yellow zone, that kind of zone of uncertainty. We don't quite know if there's going to be an injury there or not. So the more susceptible people are likely to manifest an injury in this territory. When you get above the black line, you're more likely to see it in an otherwise healthy group. In terms of force, posture, and frequency, the force and remember that the force and posture are already included in normalized peak force. The frequency is already handled in the hand activity level. So we've accounted for in a kind of simple way the major job risk factors. For duration, this is basically a normal work day. That's really it for the hand activity. There are other methods out there. I don't think that they add that much more value and they become more complicated. Where we also have problems is with the low back. And there are a number of approaches to looking at low back and injuries. And beginning in the 60s, we started looking at low back compressive force. So the force that's on the L5S1 vertebrae are the ones of interest. That's the lower back where the bending occurs. The Liberty Mutual Manual Materials Handling Tables are another resource that are still used, and I'll talk more in detail about that. The revised NIOSH lifting equation I will talk about, and then I think the TLV for lifting is again something you can bring into your lower, to your smaller employers or those with lower resources to begin to understand whether there might be a risk for back injury. So let me start to step you through these. Okay, so for back compressive force, is that there were a number of studies looking at models of the vertebrae, and some of these were actually cadaver experiments where they looked at the compressive forces and the repetition on the L5S1 looking for microfractures. They use these simple models in the workplaces and epidemiological studies and concluded that a compressive force of around 350 kilograms or 3,400 newtons of force is the safe upper limit to prevent these kinds of problems with the vertebrae. And so they're used in biomechanical models for manual materials handling. Don Blazwick at the University of Utah has developed a relatively simple biomechanical model that that estimates the back compressive force. This is something that a professional can easily use. I don't think it'll translate well to small employers or the informal economy. But basically it says we've got a number of contributors to the compressive force on the back. And one is just the body weight. The other is the distance of the load from the body. And then the other is that there is a compressive force due to the erector spinae muscles trying to bring the back up upright again. And he's within about 10% of much more sophisticated models. And so this is the reason why I like Dr. Blazwick's model. He uses in his paper the 770-pound limit. When I teach this, I use a 700-pound limit because the fact that he's got about a 10% error in his model. But this does convey the importance of load and distance away from the body. Okay, the Liberty Mutual tables, and there are several of these, but what's fascinating about Liberty Mutual is that it's a psychophysical technique. And so I'm going to spend just a minute describing these. Workers from the local community were brought in and they were asked to lift loads, and they would lift from the floor or from hand height to shoulder height. So there were three starting and I'm sorry, but then reach. So there were 3 stop points and 4 zones, and they'd be asked to lift between those zones at a given frequency. And they were asked to adjust the weight in the tote pan so that they would find that acceptable for an 8-hour day. And I've done experiments similar to this. It takes about an hour, sometimes 2 hours for the participants in these experiments to just zero in on that load. And what was nice about Liberty Mutual is they took away the visual cues. So they had false bottoms in the tote pan so that they would hide weights underneath. And so there was a very consistent kind of response among subjects as they repeated certain trials. So I think these studies are very, very well done. And I don't think I have a slide, so I'm just going to mention at this point is that when you start to apply these in an epidemiological study, they in fact predict very well the risks of injuries. Liberty Mutual started with just lifting, and then they added lowering, and then they studied carrying, and then pushing and pulling, and have created tables. And what I've done in this illustration, oh, I'm sorry, here are the goals. So it's 75% acceptable for women. That means that for any given combination, 25% of women would find that to be unacceptable. And it would be about 95% of men would find it acceptable. That goal of 75% acceptable is based on epidemiological studies. And when, as you're approaching that from fewer acceptable, that the risk of a back injury was small, and then when you reach the threshold, the risk of back injuries began to go up. So that threshold seems to be well supported. and then it meets the basic design premise of designing for most. Okay, and it turns out that the lifting and lowering recommendations are not much different. So I combined them both into the table, and if anybody's interested in these, I'd be happy to provide them. I have them both in tables and in computer Excel spreadsheets. But the point I wanted to raise is that they have them where we look at different distances away from the body. So we have that distance of the load away from the body. We also have the horizontal or the vertical distance, how much travel there is. And it does give the load and then the frequency. And this is based on 8 hours. So there's lifting and lowering. Similar kinds of data are available for carrying, and again, there are data available for pushing and pulling. So this requires a bit more understanding of the jobs and the methods involved to do it. That's the reason why I just want to lay out the principles of this approach, because I'm going to integrate them in a moment into a single approach. All right, so the NIOSH lifting equation is an attempt by a number of investigators to actually bring together the different models that were there to judge what are the demands for manual materials handling. So it looked at back compressive force. So it had a couple of good biomechanical models available looking at different postures and what kind of compressive force. And if you think about compressive force, this is really frequency independent. So whether I'm doing this lift once or whether I'm doing it multiple times a minute, the back compressive force is going to remain the same. So talking about a back compressive force limit is probably valuable only in terms of relatively rare lifts. Okay, as the frequency of those lifts increase, then what happens is that we get a psychophysical limit. In other words, remember I told you earlier that we're all strong enough to hurt ourselves. So the biomechanical limit's important to make sure we don't do that. As we do more and more, then the psychophysical limit's going to come. And we're going to look for that threshold value of 25% acceptable for women as that psychophysical. So as the frequency increases, that allowed load, if you will, is going to go down. And then there's a point where even the psychophysical limits will exhaust you. So it's not really a sustainable metabolic rate. You can do it for a day, but you couldn't do it day after day after day. So the NIOSH lifting equation also looked at what's the cardiovascular demands for doing this work, and then how do you limit it? So it did a very nice job of bringing together three theories, and actually more than theories, but principles of practice in analyzing jobs that required materials handling into one analysis method. And that's the NIOSH lifting equation. It's been revised once in 1991. So this is really the revised equation. And it provides a recommended weight limit. And what's kind of interesting about the recommended weight limit, and these are in pounds force. I forgot to put the kilogram version in for your slides, but it's 51 pounds and about 22 kilograms, 22, 24 kilograms. And then it has 6 multipliers that are different features of the job. And these multipliers have the characteristic of being between 0 and 1. I'm gonna come back to this over the next 2 slides in a little bit more detail. But what's critical is the horizontal multiplier. So the distance away from the body plays a very big role in what the recommended weight limit's going to be. And the other is the frequency multiplier. So if we talk about force, posture, and frequency as being the driving forces, and especially in biomechanics, the horizontal distance is going to dictate posture. The further you get away, the worse your body posture is. And then frequency. So we have posture and frequency, and they're dictating a force limit or a weight limit. So already with just those 2 factors, we've got our 3 major contributors accounted for. The intermediate values are the vertical multiplier, so how high up and down is the load, and an asymmetry, so how much to the side. And then very small effects are a distance multiplier, how much do we really move it vertically, and how good of grip do we have on it, the coupling multiplier. So let me show you in the next slide the multipliers, and this is 3 of them. Remember I told you the horizontal multiplier is the very influential one, and notice that once we get out in front of the body, so this is at the heels, and this basically the flat part is we're still touching the body. So this would have to be a 2-handed lift with the hands at the sides. This is where we get the hands in front of the body, and it drops very, very rapidly. So by the time we're out 20 some inches, the multiplier has gone very low, right? The vertical multiplier starts at the floor, comes up to waist height, and then goes up to a far reach. So at waist height, that's actually our optimal lifting position. So it's the optimal lifting position is near the body at the waist. And then the distance multiplier plays almost no role at all. So the horizontal multiplier is a big player. And then the next slide is going to show the frequency multipliers. And notice that they drop very, very quickly. So by the time I get to 10 lifts per minute, and I'm trying to do it 8 hours a day, it's telling me I can't do it. And at 2 hours a day, I can probably, everything else being ideal, fine. So this table includes the frequency as well as the duration of the day. And again, it goes from 1 to 0. So a big influence. The asymmetry multiplier is just how much to the side is the lift. So I want to take you back 2 slides. So here is our lifting equation, and we have frequency that goes between 1 and 0. We have horizontal multiplier that goes between 0 and 0.4. The others don't move quite as much. So we're going to get, from our job analysis, we're going to get a recommended weight limit. Then we're going to look at what's the actual load. So compute a recommended weight limit. And then the lifting index is the weight of the object divided by the recommended limit. And the maximum lifting limit, it's clear that if we have mixed jobs, that maximum lifting index in any one part of the job is the driving force. We found that in automotive manufacturing, and then there have been recent studies that have verified that across a mix of industries. So it really starts to point toward the importance of the compressive force and compressive loading, because this becomes almost more biomechanically driven. All right, so interpretation is that if it's less than one, there really isn't any risk. Between 1 and 2, you're starting to accept risk, so that the probability of an injury is beginning to increase, but from its baseline level, but not by a lot. When you go to between 2 and 3, that's where the risk starts to go upwards. And then when you're above 3, it's clear in every study that's been done that injuries are going to occur with a high probability. So where studies will differ a little bit is in the 2 to 3 range. And so you really start to need to think about taking action at 2. Okay. The ACGIH TLV for lifting looked at, they said, well, we see that this NIOSH lifting equation with a recommended weight limit and a lifting index is turning out to be really a pretty good predictor. It's got a good scientific basis, so it proves itself in the field that the science is solid. Can we, in a way, simplify it? And so the lifting TLV is a way of doing that. So it is fundamentally based on the job risk factors in the NIOSH lifting equation, which are really force, posture, and frequency and duration. And then it's been simplified so it's good for screening jobs. So I didn't provide this in a handout, but if there's some interest, I can provide a one sheet checklist on this. But basically, it says, let's look at infrequent lifts. So it's less than a couple of hours a day, and it's less than 120 lifts. And the ideal lifting is, I told you the waist, and in this, the waist levels included in the chest zone is that 32 kilograms done infrequently and close to the body and near the waist is done. And then what we know biomechanically is that if we start going further and further out, increase the horizontal distance, we in fact would expect to see a drop in that limit, and we do. And in a similar way, if we start to go up above the shoulders or below the waist and all the way down to the floor, we would expect that maximum load would also drop. So this is consistent with the force posture, and we're fixed at a low frequency. Notice that we're saying you should never lift high and far away, and you shouldn't lift from the floor other than being very close to the body. All right. Okay. Now, with intermediate frequency, so it's more than 2 hours a day, so duration is longer, but it's still less than 30 lifts an hour, which is a lift every other minute. Notice, our frame of reference was 32 kilograms, I think. Yes, 32. So at the ideal position, it's dropped to 27. We would expect that. So as the frequency increases, we would expect that the maximum limit would decrease. And then it still decreases going out from the body, decreases going higher or lower. And we still don't like the idea that you would lift from the floor or at a high level, at a medium or far distance away from the body. It just isn't good practice. Finally, then is the higher frequency. And that's more than 2 hours a day. So that could be up to 8 hours. But still less than 360 lifts per hour, which is 6 lifts a minute or a lift every 10 seconds. That's a pretty frequent lift. That's a lot of lifting in the course of a day. Notice that our reference level is dropped yet again. So we would expect that the frequency increases, for the same posture, the force is going to have to drop. And then it goes out and it goes down. But notice here also with high frequency, most of your lifting should be occurring close to the body, not from the floor. And if you start going out, it should be at the chest or above the knees, right, level. And those levels have dropped considerably. So it doesn't require any calculations. Can and has reasonably good predictive value. The TLVs, we would predict a problem anytime you're doing more than 360 lifts per hour. That's just really a lot of lifting. We really don't know much about lifting beyond 8 hours a day. I looked at 10-hour shifts recently in automotive manufacturing. We didn't see a difference going from 8 hours to 10 hours. That's one study. When we look at the idea that what seems to drive it is the max lifting index in mixed kind of jobs, that too would tend to say that we could probably extend this out for beyond 8 hours into 10 hours. We don't have data for 12 hours. But right now the position would be, you need to be careful if you're beyond 8 hours, but I wouldn't be surprised if you're okay. You shouldn't twist more than 30 degrees. Twisting of the trunk adds first of all, the muscles are weaker, but then it adds substantially more to the back compressive force. So you get a torsional effect with the twisting, as well as an increased compressive force. With professional judgment, for instance, if I am looking at one-handed lifting, I really don't make a distinction. I think one-handed lifting and two-handed lifting provide about the same results with the same level of risk. But again, the data I have are relatively limited on that. The general assumption is 2. We saw from the WSHA, if you have flex trunk postures beyond 30 degrees, that's a risk factor. And I think that's true. We know that there are problems, for instance, with constrained overhead posture, whether in underground coal mining operations, we have what we call medium and low coal, where people are continually bent down, or in an airplane hold. So we know those are problematic. High heat and humidity, we'll talk a little bit about heat and humidity tomorrow, but that puts an extra cardiovascular burden on the person that will decrease both their coordination as well as their muscle strength. Unstable objects are always risky because the center of gravity can change and put a sudden load. And then trunk postures, again, that get rid of that normal curve of the back can be a problem. All right. So as I've gone through these, and and I'll take some questions. I finished a little bit early here. A lot of we refer to these ergonomics analysis methods as tools, and we want to just make sure we use the right tools. We're asking the right questions in order to get the right answers. So, Dr. Denny, I'm available for some questions.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Bernard. There are 6 questions that have been posted. So the first question comes from Dr. Dina Luciana. She asked about how to conduct the workload assessment among workers with a double burden in physical and mental load.
A double burden of physical and mental load is,
Yes.
oh, okay. Um, if the mental workload is cognitive, if it's decision making, and high physical burden, uh, I don't think I would be inclined to change my opinion about how to assess the physical load. The problem with the high mental demand is that we assume, for instance, that they're going to have well coordinated actions. And so if the mental demands are high enough that they start making mistakes, then that mistake can cause, uh, um, for instance, a very quick postural change that would lead to a back injury. All right. So
Okay.
I would treat them separately, other than the fact that look for the mental demand to cause an action that would be unexpected for the physical demands. And then there's workplace stress. So if the mental demands are high, there will be the stress factors. What we can't account for there are any of the inflammatory responses that may have a direct result, and then also the psychological climate where they might be more inclined to report problems. So that becomes very complicated if it's a psychosocial stress versus a cognitively demanding task. Two different features of the psychology.
Oke, jadi Mbak Dina ada 2 perbedaan dan itu 2 hal yang berbeda, maka asesmennya akan berbeda-beda. So I would like to move for the second question. Dr. Bernard, how to prevent and manage back pain and carpal tunnel syndrome related to work-related musculoskeletal disorder and ergonomics that occurrence in the office that occur in the office from
In the office.
Dr.
Yeah.
Hamza Hasim.
Yeah. I don't want to speak much to the medical management side because I know nothing about it.
Okay.
If you don't mind, what we do talk about is that we want people to report early symptoms. So if they start to feel back pain, we want them to report it to a provider. Do you use that expression provider for healthcare people who deliver healthcare providers? The and then we want the providers to take conservative action. In other words, for back pain, we probably want them to go the route of an NSAID, a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory agent, and surgery. Cortisone and surgery are things of a last resort. You want conservative treatment, conservative return to work on those. For offices, um, designing of office workstations is important. Chairs are probably the crucial. They have 6 stand workstations. Um, we had a PhD student at USF looked at the workstand. In fact, the standing workstations are used much more frequently and sustained than I ever thought they would be. So, in that regard, they do what they're supposed to do. They allow you to stand and people use them. There's some more work coming out now that that it actually probably leads to more back problems than it solves. So, what I'm the feeling I'm getting now is you want to be sitting most of the time, but provide an opportunity to change posture. And whether that's getting up out of the chair and taking a break or moving to a standing workstation, but a standing workstation by itself isn't the solution. We're doing a study now on people who are setting up home offices due to the the pandemic and not having them at work. And one of the things that we're finding is that there are a lot of badly designed home offices, and those are starting to cause problems. So what was probably a well-designed office at work is becoming a poorly designed work office at home, with then the problems that go with that. Does that answer the question?
What do you think, Dr. Hamza? He's on YouTube channel. So yeah, I think I need to view from the YouTube whether you or he's apparently he hasn't respond responded back from the YouTube, so we can move to the next question.
Okay.
The next question uh, comes from Dr. Bayu Wijasena, one of our faculty member. um, what is the basis or the methods for categorizing the back angle of 30 degrees for 2 to 4 hours and 45 degrees for 1 to 2 hours?
Yeah.
And in Indonesia, we use commonly we use Rolla and Reba to do the ergonomic assessment.
Um, you know, so two things. The or three things. The 30 and 45 degrees are relatively arbitrary. That was done by Barbara Silverstein and some of her colleagues, and she's incredibly competent as an ergonomist. So I think she found the evidence that would say that those are good numbers. And I'm going to have to just defer to the fact that I think a very capable person came up with them. The next is that I'm very familiar with Rula and Reba, and I've used them a little bit myself. Um, I am, but I'm moving away from them. I'm not recommending them anymore. The I've tried to take the sub scores in Rula and Reba and relate them to musculoskeletal disorders, and they don't do a very good job. And the total score in Rula and Reba are whole body scores, and I think it's very important to isolate body regions and ask about regions. And I think that when you go to a whole body score, that becomes a little bit difficult. You could have two body regions. You could have one body region kind of marginal, but not enough to push the Rebus or Rula score over. Rule and Reaver are used by a lot of people all around the world. Um, they're very popular tools. They've People have looked at them and validated in certain circumstances, but I just don't share that enthusiasm.
Okay. The next question is from Sabto Budi Nugroho. Mr. Sabto Budi Nugroho, how do we manage set alarm, a work process that involves manual handling that we cannot avoid, and at least at very minimum level?
Okay, I'm sorry, Dr. Denny, I didn't fully understand that question. Could you repeat it or restate it?
Okay, how do we manage set an ALARP, a work process that involves manual handling and we cannot avoid?
Yeah, so um, I'm not sure that I'm saying you need to totally avoid materials handling, although I kind of am saying you should reduce it as much as possible, but they're just jobs that require it. Um, I think what you want to do is bring that load, keep that load as close to the body and specifically as close to the waist as you can. So anything that can design a work system that brings the load as close to the body as you can, and then as close to the chest or the waist as you can, um, does a lot to reduce the risk.
Okay, so that's the answer, Pak Sabta. And then from Miss Lina Tarigan, there is a question that in the research, what are the factors that contribute to carpal tunnel syndromes among road cleaning service workers, considering the use of manual work equipment such as broom?
Okay, so carpal tunnel syndrome with people who use brooms or other carpet cleaning.
Mhm.
Oh boy. um, that's I'm pretty sure that that's been specifically. Well, I better take that back. That's a difficult problem, and I don't think I can answer it. The risk factors are um, so one risk factor. Let me get my hands in front of the camera. One risk factor is the grip on the broom, and the way I'm showing it is kind of ideal. My wrists are straight this way and this way, so they're not deviated, um, and I get a reasonable grasp on it. The problem becomes as you sweep, you leave those ideal postures and go into unideal postures, and at the time you're exerting force, and then the frequency is high. It's the For carpal tunnel syndrome, it's going to be I'm sorry, my camera is it, for carpal tunnel syndrome, it's the deviated wrist with the force exertion that's likely causing the most irritation of those tendons. So it doesn't surprise me that a very repetitive sweeping action where the wrists are involved in that motion is going to be problematic. Again, asking if a vacuum cleaner or something else could do a better job. You have to remember with a vacuum cleaner, you're now moving the shoulder, so you've changed the joint that might be insulted.
Yeah, actually, all the road cleaning service workers in Indonesia, they only use broom instead of using mobile cleaning devices. That's yeah, something need to be considered, and our voice to the government would be meaningful.
Yeah,
Because they have to walk in the morning.
the other is that I don't know the brooms they use, but designing the broom to be more efficient with each sweep, being able to carry more, and the stiffness of bristles and things like that might help reduce the forces. I'm not sure that there's something that can't be done with handle design, but handle designs are difficult.
Okay. Okay, so this is maybe a challenge for our students to conduct an innovation research and low cost solution. Is it that, Dr. Bernard?
Yes.
Okay. So there's still some question. The next question comes from um, Doug Hiran from Jember University. What are the differences between indoor and outdoor heat stress?
Indoor and outdoor heat stress.
Yes.
All right. I'll talk more about that tomorrow, but
Okay.
but in the end, none. Um,
Exactly.
the source of the heat stress doesn't play a role. The other things will that might be due to indoors and outdoors, but no difference otherwise.
Okay. Okay. So tomorrow, we expect him to join the session from Zoom, and this is from Ekawati, one of our younger faculty member. Some workers sometimes use a back brace, a type of corsets, or something else. Can I change the load limit that is carried?
Okay, I'm sorry. There was noise on there and I didn't hear your question very well.
Okay, so some workers here sometimes use a back brace or a corset, and sometimes they use something else. And then, if I'm the ergonomist, can I change the load limit that is carried by the workers?
Yeah. Okay. I'll ask for that second question again, but the first question is you describe it as a corset, and we call them back belts. Back belts are demonstrated to be not helpful. All right. So
Okay.
uh, I don't recommend them. They have by and large fallen out of favor in the United States. I very seldom see them
Okay.
anymore. And the second part of the question, did I answer
Is
it all?
can I change?
Can what?
Yes, you answered it.
Oh,
And the second question is, how can I change the load limit of the workers?
well, the you can, you can improve that by keeping the load near the body, all right, and decreasing the frequency of the lift,
Okay,
all right.
that exactly you answered the question already. And then there is a question again. Another question from okay. Okay, there is a field evaluations that we put the video like surveillance in the hidden place, and then how long is the minimum video to be set up to describe the real work-life practices among workers.
Yeah, I don't have experience with that. You know, we've done a lot of observation of workers that have been, you know, not, you know, we've been with a camera in our hands, so we're not trying to hide it or anything. And we find that they will um, quickly move into their standard work practices. In other words, they don't modify their work practices because we're taking a picture of them. Um, Experiments that I've done in the lab where you would expect them to try to do things the way I want them to, and as I trying to capture them to do it the way they would do it, I'm finding that under an hour they will be fully back into their practices. So I don't think long.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
Accidentally, the host muted my voice. And based on the YouTube response, that all the questions were already answered. And then that's all the question.
All right. Well, then in which case I think that I've given you 10 more minutes to your day.
Oh, sure. Thank you.
Uh,
So, is there any questions?
it was a
Some questions?
pleasure. I'm sorry.
I try to ask the audiences.
Okay. All right. From my point of view, I thank you very much for your attention. And as I said, I appreciated the warm welcome, and I very much look forward to joining you tomorrow for heat stress. If there's anybody who has questions that they would like me to address, and you know, if they want to send questions about heat stress in advance, I'd be happy to take them and try to address them. And then
Yes.
you remind me to talk about indoor and outdoor. I'll try to make a note of that. Okay.
Okay.
Right.
Halo semuanya, apabila ada pertanyaan tentang tekanan panas atau heat stress, bisa disampaikan melalui chat atau melalui WhatsApp saya, atau disampaikan melalui form pendaftaran yang dikirim ke Mbak Nisa atau di chat ke HP-nya Mbak Nisa yang ada di flyer. Untuk itu besok nanti malam akan saya kumpulkan sehingga besok kita bisa mengorganisir beberapa saya akan sampaikan ke Dr. Bernard untuk mendapatkan jawaban. Bagaimana teman-teman? Semoga hari ini kita bisa mengikuti kuliah ergonomi dengan semangat, penuh semangat. Memang banyak sekali faktornya. Di sini saya simpulkan, Dr. Bernard, would you like me to summarize in bahasa Indonesia for them?
If you wish, sure.
Oke. Jadi yang inti dari kuliah hari ini adalah bahwa tujuan dari ergonomi adalah untuk mencocokkan manusia supaya pas dan posisinya tidak membuat sakit, dan idealnya semua orang harus bisa terpenuhi. Ya, kira-kira 95% bisa, sehingga berimplikasi pada keuntungan bagi pemilik usaha. Namun, ada tantangan bahwa menjangkau industri kecil dan ekonomi informal tadi sudah disampaikan, yang low cost production atau solusi yang berbiaya rendah. Kemudian menyangkut keselamatan dan kesehatan pekerja, kemudian produktivitas, kemudian kepuasan kerja. Nah, asesmen ergonomi tadi dipaparkan adalah antropometri, psikologi, dan fisiologi. Kemudian dipaparkan tentang WISHA untuk ergonomic assessment sebagai alternatif dari Rula and Rebat. Manapun yang akan dipilih, silahkan Anda pelajari. Untuk itu, material nanti bisa diminta ke Mbak Nisa karena sudah saya forward ke Mbak Nisa, material dari Dr. Bernard. Kemudian ada aspek kelelahan juga. Kemudian ada beberapa pertanyaan yang tadi sudah disampaikan. Apabila belum jelas, silahkan mengirim WhatsApp ke Mbak Nisa atau email atau WhatsApp ke saya. Untuk itu, pagi ini kita di sini jam 9.50, tetapi di Tampa, Florida ini sudah jam 11 malam. I was trying to inform them that today is actually your day off on Sunday at 11 p.m. Dr. Bernard, is it right?
And yes.
Okay, so here in Indonesia, it's West Indonesian time zone or Jakarta time zone. Now it's 9:50 a.m. That is quite challenging, and we are very grateful for your kindness to also sacrifice your holiday. So this is all the lecture from Dr. Bernard. That is very, very enriching our knowledge on how to handle the ergonomic problem, and especially in Indonesia, ergonomic problems are is the problem not just in informal sectors but also in formal sectors. Considering that 90% of the alumni from Faculty of Public Health, the Department of Occupational and Environmental Occupational Safety and Health, they work as an OSH officer in some big companies as well as in the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Manpower. Many of them works in the oil and gas companies, and some of them already work overseas. And this is a very engaging and what we call it, make us proud of the alumni, and they are still connect with our college and our study program, and sometimes they really make actually periodically they arrange a lecture session from the alumni to the current students. This is a brief information of our engagement in occupational safety and health. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Bernard. And I I would like to give this session and return to the Master of Ceremony. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Denny. To all participants, please do not forget to fill in the registration form so you can get your certification. Thank you very much for Dr. Bernard, who are willing to share all of his knowledge to all of us today. We hope this event will be beneficial for all of us. We apologize for any mistakes in this event, and thank you once again for participating in today's Visiting Professor program. Please join us tomorrow, themed Heat Stress Lecture and Research Topic with Dr. Bernard again as our lecturer at 7 a.m. See you all again tomorrow. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Bye.
So long.
Have a great night. Thank you. Okay. Selamat pagi semuanya. Bye.
Terima kasih Bu Hanifa.
Selamat pagi Bu Hani, terima kasih sekali.
Oke.
Sampai ketemu besok pagi jam 7.
Baik, terima kasih. Ya.
Terima kasih Mbak Novia. Jangan lupa besok bergabung.
Iya,
Salahan. Terima
besok
kasih
jam 7
Mbak
kita
Nisa, ya. Mbak Nisa, terima kasih juga udah sangat membantu copy paste dari YouTube. Besok gitu lagi ya Mbak Nisa.
Iya Bu. Terima kasih.
Ya, terima kasih juga Mas Eko yang sudah membantu kami dari pagi tadi. Jam 6 kita sudah standby Bu Hani. Sampai ketemu besok jam 6 kembali kita standby.
Ya, Dek Yuli appreciate sekali karena solusinya sangat luar biasa. Tidak semua orang bisa mengambil tindakan yang sangat berani seperti ini dan Dek Yuli ada kendala di Undip, tidak ada internet, langsung ambil booking hotel. Itu luar biasa. Saya sangat terharu dan sangat bangga. Mbak Novi, terima kasih sekali, cantik sekali cara meng-MC-nya. Dan
Terima kasih Bu Hanifa.
Cantik juga orangnya Bu Hani.
Iya. Jadi senang sekali ya kuesionernya pertanyaannya banyak dan kita memang masih harus belajar. Terima kasih Mas Eko mungkin sudah bisa keluar dari
Bu Hani, ini ada beberapa yang meminta saya untuk bergabung besok pagi. Mungkin besok kita akan share kita akan share link juga untuk kegiatan besok pagi. Nah, ada beberapa yang ingin bergabung khusus untuk hit stress besok. Jadi mungkin link YouTube-nya akan saya bagikan juga besok agar kita bisa mulai besok pagi untuk beberapa yang berminat. Mungkin bisa diinfokan ke beberapa alumni dan mahasiswa yang berminat hit stress. Oke.
Baik. Ya lumayan pokoknya asal besok yang copy paste dari YouTube Mbak Nisa saya translate ini jawaban tidak saya ketik tapi nanti jawaban bisa disimak di YouTube gitu ya. Terima kasih. Saya hanya mencatat beberapa. Nah seperti itu. Ya memang untuk di US itu kita memang kalau memanggil dokter memang bukan Mrs. karena dianggap sebagai atau bukan Mister karena dianggap sebagai degradasi respect gitu. Jadi besok tapi sudah nanti ada yang bisa ngasih tahu Pak Dekan. Ya udah. Oke, terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Saya izin leave ya. Ya, jadi ya untuk yang dokter kita panggil dokter last name gitu. Nanti
terima kasih Bu Hanifa.